I thank you guys for waiting for me. I apologize. The internet is always finicky right when you don't want it to be. So I appreciate you sticking around for today's session. It is an AMA, Ask Me Anything on Harvard, Stanford, and Wharton, the tricky three, as I like to call it. We're going to cover a lot today, but I want to start right off with a question for you. This whole session is all about your questions for me, and I've got lots of stuff in case questions are slow, but I encourage you to use the comments to keep them coming. But don't worry, I've got some questions too, and I've got lots of info that'll help you think about how it is that you actually secure a win from one of these schools. But first, I want to pose a question to all of you. How many rejection letters did the top 3 schools send out? We always focus on the class size or the acceptance rate, but I encourage you all to take a minute and just think about this. How many rejection letters do you think cumulatively do these 3 schools, Harvard, Stanford, and Wharton, send out? Any ideas? And oh, by the way, there might be some noise in the background. I apologize for that. So I want you to think about this. You might be thinking, all right, like it's a few thousand or maybe even close to 10,000. Well, here, thousands every round. That's a good answer, but I would even up it. I'd up it. I mean, yes, it's technically right. It's a lot. Let me show you what it is. In a second, I'm going to be flipping back and forth. Here are the numbers. Harvard Business School rejects around 8,500 applications a year. Wharton, around 6,000 a year. And Stanford, around close to 7,000 a year. That is like almost, it's give or take 20,000 rejection letters every single year. That's an enormous amount. Now, you might already be one step ahead of me and saying like, well, that's not 20,000 people rejected though, because lots of people might apply to multiple schools, right? They might apply to Harvard and Stanford or Harvard and Wharton or just to Wharton. But still, at a minimum, if everybody is applying to all of these, like, it's still thousands and thousands of people who are rejected every year. So already everything is stacked against us going into this process. Now, I want to ask you a second question. It might be easy to think of like, oh, well, those people weren't qualified, right? Well, here's the rub, and that's what today's session is really designed around. How many of these 20,000-ish rejection letters that get sent out, how many are for people that were actually qualified to get in, right? So how many people actually passed muster and could have succeeded in the classroom had they been accepted? Because this is where I think a lot of you will find yourself at, and that's where we're really going to focus today's MAA on. So really, what we have heard consistently from admissions committee members is that, that around 50%, it could be even higher, closer to 75% of applicants are fully qualified to have a spot in the class. So that means they're rejecting around 50% of people, of candidates that are stellar. If you've ever seen the profiles of those who are rejected, some of them you might be scratching your head at and wondering, why were they rejected? They're so awesome. So the number that I keep in mind is around, it's at Harvard, it's around 4,000, Wharton 3,000, somewhere between 3,000 and 4,000 of applicants at each of these schools are more than awesome enough to have a spot in the class. Yet something still went wrong. So really, this is where I want to focus today's session. I'm going to take a moment now to introduce myself before I open up the topics really about how to think about these 3 schools. And again, throughout, I'm going to say, keep asking questions, chime in with things, because the more interactive this can be, the better. I'm here to answer your questions. But first, let me take a moment and introduce who it is you're talking to. So actually, first, this is what we'll talk about is like the way to succeed is understanding the common themes that link the 3, and then the critical differences. So again, that's teeing up what we're going to discuss. but first on me. My name is Liza Weale, and I am the founder of Gatehouse Admissions. Gatehouse Admissions is a boutique MBA admissions consulting firm where we really focus on Harvard, Stanford, and Wharton. I will assure you it's not for the faint of heart. These are incredibly, we just saw those stats, these are incredibly challenging schools to succeed at, but we've done it again and again and again. We've worked with hundreds of applicants on these three schools, and we've developed a very deep expertise. I would say we prove it out in the results, which is important. If you are thinking about business school, you know it is a quantitative and critical thinking program and educational experience. So if you're reading this, you're wondering, okay, well, prove that you've got results and deep expertise. Well, I have it because I have to keep flipping over. So here are our results. I founded Gatehouse over 5 years ago. I've been consulting for, I guess it's like 15 years full time now, but about 5 years ago, I decided I saw a spot in the market to really focus on Harvard, Stanford, and Wharton. And I promised myself I was also going to look at the results and track how we did. And what we have ended up kind of using as our benchmark is this idea of 3 times. So we outperformed the market by 3 times at Harvard, Stanford, and Wharton at both the interview stage and at the final acceptance stage. So I'm not going to bore you with the numbers, but I will just share Harvard, the first row. So for Harvard Business School, about 20% of applicants are interviewed. 62% of Gatehouse's HBS clients are interviewed, so 3x. And then for the acceptance rate, Harvard only accepts around 10%. That's why they reject so many thousands and thousands of people. Gatehouse HBS clients is 40% of our HBS clients are accepted. So we have a lot of expertise, and this is really where I want to focus the conversation. It's why you can be rest assured that you're getting intel from someone who has been through it again and again with clients. All right, so this is where I really want the questions to start flowing, guys, because as you can tell, I will keep talking, but I want you to chime in with your questions, anything at all on these 3 schools. And here's where I'll start, tee up the conversation. Here's the themes that link the schools. Now, if you look at these things, these areas, these are the school states exactly what they are looking for. Harvard describes that it is seeking people who are business-minded, leadership-focused, and growth-oriented. Wharton wants to understand what you will achieve and contribute in the Wharton classroom, within the Wharton community, and throughout your post-MBA career. And GSB is trying to understand how you lead, how you think, and how you see the world. Now pause for a second. Anything here surprise you? What do you see that's similar? What do you see that's different? Any comments or thoughts? I encourage you, or even questions about what this stuff means. It's easy to say business-minded or how you lead, but does that really tell you what the schools are looking for? I would argue not really, right? So a lot of what we do is help you interpret what the schools are saying they're looking for so that you know how to present your best self in your application. So part of our team, we have 2 former admissions directors from HBS on our team, and they're always super helpful at giving us the sort of admissions committee way of looking things so that we know how to translate it. So these things, they might sound slightly different, but they're all deeply related. And it's essential you understand that because, again, this goes back to this idea of looking at how many people are rejected and how many qualified people are rejected, because they start to miss this. They read these things, but don't really know how to interpret them. So I want to share what these things that they're looking for really mean. And this is super important. This list is super important. So what Harvard, Wharton, and Stanford are looking for I'm going to tell you something that might surprise you. They're all effectively looking for the same thing. They're looking for the same superstar. That is why every year there are dual and triple admits across all these programs, because they have found a superstar. If it was a superstar that only appealed to one of the schools, they would never get those dual or triple admits. And I think there is this misconception out there that you have to look one way to HBS, another way to Stanford, and a third way to Wharton. Because if you look at these words, they're all different, right? No, they're looking for exactly the same thing. That's number one headline I want you to write down from today's session. So what is it that they're looking for? They all want leaders. Leaders is a word, leader and leadership. Those are words that are tossed around, and it's really hard to know what those things mean. But I've paraphrased the way that Stanford GSB defines it, and I find it really helpful. The schools want people who take initiative to create change. They see an opportunity and they go for it. So taking initiative is critical and displays leadership. Persevering through challenges to actually deliver results is also a form of leadership. So if you think about, you spot an opportunity, you are going to rise to the challenge and get things done. So starting to think about those times and those things that you have done, that you've actually kind of persevered through challenge and actually driven results, gotten to the goal line, and can point out what you've done. That's a second form and side of leadership. A third side of leadership is gathering resources, rallying others. The way to think about it is, if you're studying for a test, and a test is getting a top score on a test, even let's say like the GMAT or the GRE. I wish all of you luck on that. I know it can be a bear. And when you get that top score, and I hope all of you do get that top score, that can feel like quite an achievement, correct? But it's really inward facing at the end of the day. You had to work hard. You took initiative to actually work hard. You persevered through challenges and got the test score you wanted. But it was very individual. It's very you focused, and you didn't have to work with anybody else to get things done. So getting a good test score is not leadership. When you're rallying others or getting buy-in from others, or even gathering resources, getting help from others, that's a form of leadership. And then the last thing is, the schools really want people who are going to change the world around them. Those are what leaders are. They persevere through these challenges. They gather people behind them, in front of them, however it works, whatever change they're affecting. And ultimately, they're people who improve the world a little bit. And those are big, bold words, improving the world around them. But it can be changing a culture. Perhaps it's a culture that really feels like you do your job and you leave, but bringing some sort of traditions within the workplace, that can be a form of leadership. Another thing could be obviously creating a new process that makes the output or product better. All of these things are forms of improving the world around you. So leadership, I took a long time on that, because that, I would say, is the thing that there's a few things here that are going to start to let the best candidates really rise to the top. But unless you know how to show and demonstrate your leadership and what they're really thinking about when it comes to leadership, you're going to fail on that metric. You're not going to rise to the top. Academic excellence. So this goes back to the test score and your academics. They're looking for people who are hungry, curious, and creative, people who are analytically strong because of how many numbers are in business school, but they want to know that you can succeed, that you have the horsepower, the drive, the tenacity, and the curiosity to succeed in the classroom, to grow and to improve yourself. So that's a little bit more stats created, but again, thinking about how many of the class was that they reject is actually capable of doing the work. A lot of it is in this academic excellence. They've got amazing stats, a 735 on the GMAT, or if you're in a 4.0 scale, you've got a 3.9 or a 4.0. They have those stats, but yet because of these other things, they still might be rejected. But on the flip side, you need those stats. In addition, you need to show that you're, right? I use the word superstar. How do you do that? Well, there's a benchmark. There is how everybody else is doing and then how you're doing. You want to be able to show the schools that you are doing better than your peers. That could be a promotion or being rated top bucket or being assigned responsibilities that are really ahead of your tenure. A lot of this will show up in the resume where you don't have to, how should I say this? Where it's okay to brag, I should say, because it's all factual. It's a little harder to write about those things in an essay. But you can certainly use your resume to really indicate this standout performance. This is where you might be on the board or receiving awards, any of those recognitions, those are superstar qualifications. Career purpose. Look, if you look in the left-hand column, the schools are looking for those that are, HBS calls it business-minded. Wharton wants to know what you're going to be doing and how you'll succeed in your post-MBA career. There's a little bit of a less of a question in what Stanford says it's evaluating, but one of its questions is all about your goals. So you really do want to have purpose. You're going to business school to reach your career goals. It is hard to make a case for why business school if you haven't defined those career goals. So they need to be thoughtful, reasonable, and logical. They need to tie and make sense because these schools are going to place bets on the ones that they think are most likely to achieve those goals. And then lastly, this is another thing that people get tripped up about. Now, this might sound pretty obvious, but they're looking to understand your character. And traits that really appeal to the schools are things like grit, reliability, humility, empathy, and resourcefulness. Now, those things are very hard to write about. And this is another thing that keeps people from bubbling up to the top. It's easy to use these words. I actually usually strike them right out of an essay. If someone has to describe themselves as having grit, it's just kind of like brag. It's a little bit braggy. I have grit. No, you want to share a story that demonstrates grit without ever using the word. So one strategy I encourage you, this is like another strategy, or the first thing was all about these schools are looking for the exact same thing. Another, this is just a quick tip. Any word where you are sort of complimenting your characters or value traits, strike them from your essays. You should be able to share the stories that demonstrate those words without ever saying it, because the minute you call yourself as being, humble, it's not very humble, is it? So keep that in mind. All right, I'm going to pause here. I really, really want questions. So if anybody has any questions on anything about these three schools, or really any school, business school, about what makes these different or the application process, I encourage you to enter any questions you might have. I do have some additional slides, but I guess my question to you would be, is there anything here that surprised you, or is there any questions you have about where you would display these different things? Encourage you to chime in with the chat. Otherwise, I'll keep going. But at any point, throw it in, because while clearly I'm very comfortable in talking to the camera, it's much more fun to talk to you and hear about where you are in the process and how I can help. But the last thing I'll say on the slide is, if there's any one slide that I really want you to put in your head, it's this one. This is, if you really focus on our words, this is how you will make sure you are not only qualified for a spot, but you will get the spot. Okay. In terms of, thank you, we've got a question, I'm going to take it. In terms of work experience, do they look for specific roles as if it's difficult to lead in an entry role? That's a great question. They recognize, that's a super, super question. So schools recognize that you are at the beginning of your career. They do not have misconceptions like you should be managing a team or you should be running a business unit. It just doesn't make sense. You're in the early stages of your career. You're still learning. So they look for a few things when they evaluate your career, and then I'll talk about the leadership portion. Number one, they want to understand the rigor of your role. Remember that this is a quantitatively demanding program. So they will look for evidence. Are you using decision making, analytics, critical thinking in your day job? And you can certainly make that clear if you are on your resume. Another strategy I always encourage you to do is think about your lead verbs of each of your bullets. If you are not showing how you use analytics in those bullets, rework those first verbs. So analyzed, identified, spotted an opportunity. All these are very subtle ways of reinforcing that you're using critical thinking. Then the other thing is you want to show breadth. So the schools, this is Harvard that uses the term. I don't know if the other schools use it, to be honest, but they evaluate it for sure. They call it your visibility. HBS refers to it as visibility. Again, this is why it's helpful to have former HBS admissions committee members on our team. They want to know, do you have a general sense of how business works? And that implies you have to be in a for-profit role. Could be how organizations work, about that sort of just general business acumen. And so what they want to get a sense of is, in your role, though it might be junior, though it might be small, do you have a good sense of how your role impacts the bigger picture? And so a lot of this on your resume, you're going to communicate through, again, driving to results. And results, I want you to think about the big picture. So what I mean by this is, I don't know, let's say you are a software developer and you're making features, and you've gotten a feature done. Okay, that feels like a result, right? I launched this feature. No, take it a step up. What does that feature enable? Why is that capturing more customers? How is it helping your product differentiate yourself in the market? So they look for this visibility in your role as well, and that's a little bit of the rigor. And the last thing I'll say is they do recognize that when you are junior in your role, you don't have as much leadership experience, but that's where you have to build other opportunities to get that leadership experience. That's when things like your community involvement, your participation in university and college are really quite important to business school, because that's where they can see that, looking at that first bullet, initiative, persevering through to results, rallying others, and improving the world around you. You might not have opportunity to do that in the office, but the world's your oyster once you step outside of your office doors, right? And so how have you taken advantage of that, the world being your oyster, and really demonstrated yourself as a leader using these metrics? Okay, that was a long answer, but I love the questions, and let's keep them coming. This one, let's see, this is the next question. This might be a niche question, but have HBS and GSB changed their admissions approach in response to declining employment outcomes, e.g. fewer graduates securing jobs within the 3 months? It's a great question. Look, my belief is they've always looked at employability coming out of business school. But they also, as employment it's still kind of figuring its way out, how is AI going to be impacted? I was actually just reading that now there's been a hiring boost in private equity firms. That's just one example. So it's always going to be a little bit of a seesaw. What they are looking for, though, it's these things, right? These things in our words. Sorry, I'm pointing to my screen. You don't know what I'm pointing at. Our words. This is sort of, okay, how likely is this person to succeed in reaching their goals? And if their goals don't come to fruition, are they strong enough to pivot and land on their feet? So I believe that the schools are always looking and have always been looking for employability. Now, if you are sponsored by your company or if you're entering a family business, it is never a bad thing. because that will give the schools confidence that you will indeed have a job coming out of the program. But even if you're saying like, look, I want to go into consulting, and if consulting is on a trend to hire fewer, consultants coming out of business school, is that going to hurt you? I don't believe it is, because honestly, what they're looking for is, do you have a plan? It's like, and I will get the quote wrong on who said it, but the best plan, having a plan gives someone confidence that you can deviate from that plan and be okay, but no plan is bad. So even if your career goals, if that is a shrinking pool, it's not necessarily going to hurt you, because if you're strong enough, A, they think you'll be able to get one of those spots. And B, if you don't get one of those spots, you'll be able to get something else. So I don't think things are changing, but they are looking, the only thing I would say is they are looking for people who are flexible and adaptable. But I think, again, that has always been the case. It's just, I think they assume that students are going to have to rely on that adaptability and flexibility even more so in a slightly, in a more difficult job market. Okay. What do you recommend older applicants to do? 35 plus. Great question. 35 plus, you're not, I would really say you're not looking at the 2-year programs. Think of it this way. If you're 35 in a program with a bunch of 25-year-olds, think back to who you are. And this is not to do any disservice to the 25-year-olds who are on this Zoom, but think about who you were at 25 and how much you've grown since. And if you're surrounded by other 20, your entire class is 25, you might not get out of that program what you want to. So I would really encourage you to consider the executive MBA programs. You might consider European programs that just sort of skew a little bit older. And I would also encourage you, there are some really specialized full-time executive level MBA programs, the Sloan Fellows program at MIT, the MSX program at Stanford, and London Business School's Sloan Fellows program. Those are ideal for applicants who have more experience, and same with the exec MBA programs, which are more part-time in nature. But there's so many cool variations of these programs now. I have a past client who is currently in the joint Columbia LBS program. And the client, she's regularly going to class in London Business School, over in New York City, and really developing a global career. So I think the biggest thing for you, for older, more experienced applicants, like that's a plus, but you've got to find the right home for it. And I would really encourage you, perhaps this ship has sailed, the 2-year programs at Harvard, Stanford, and Wharton, but so be it. That is what it is. That does not mean there aren't other opportunities. It just means you might have to do some extra digging to find them. But those are some examples to keep in mind. Okay, how do I frame big achievement and humility in the same essay? Is there a situation where I might come off as a bit hypocritical? That is an amazing question, and a little bit hard to explain, but it's essential. And it's where the mantra of show versus tell really comes into play. And I also think the STAR format for storytelling is essential here too. So the STAR format, you might have heard about it. It's situation, task, actions, results, and reflection. And not everybody refers to that second R. I always do. I think it's really essential for these programs. They're looking for people who are able to think about their own growth and development. They want to grow and develop, and some of that is reflecting on the growth and development that's always already happened. So that second R, reflection, is really important with the STAR format. So the thing with the STAR format and the show versus tell, what I mean is, I worked really hard to get something done. That's a tell. I am telling you, I worked really hard. You have to believe me. Instead, show it. I don't know. This is going to be a little bit over the top. But the clock read 11:30 p.m. My MD was waiting for the presentation, but I still hadn't double checked it. 2 hours later, I was hitting send, and knew that I had given my best. Now, that's too wordy. You're going to have to, like, a lot of the iteration of this process is trying to boil down the essential parts, but that at least that hopefully shows you the difference between a tell, I worked really hard and got this done, and a show. You are describing it. You are describing the world that you were in. You are letting, like, kind of like describing it as it unfolded, so that the reader is right there with you experiencing it, and they infer that you worked very hard without you ever saying it. So that is like, so the situation, task, actions, results paired with show versus tell. Another thing is using very vivid, specific details. The clock read 11:30 p.m. as opposed to I worked really hard. I pulled an all-nighter. So the other thing with show versus tell is vivid, specific details. And then the last thing I'll say about the STAR format, I often see my clients, our clients don't at the beginning really share much about their actions. They say, I reviewed the presentation and sent it in. So, or whatever, I don't know. Yeah, like I finished the presentation and I was able to send it in. But how did you finish? What did you do? What did you think through? Did you call a fellow associate to review your presentation for some final tweaks? Did you rework any of the slides because the takeaways weren't done? Did you think about how your manager likes to interpret data and rework some things? The actions are the things that show you in action, right? And so you don't want to skip those. Show versus tell, again, those vivid, specific details, but this is where I'm starting to see your intentionality, your strategic thinking in play. All of these are strategies of how you can bring a big achievement to life without ever, you don't have to say I was humble. You don't have to say I worked really hard. So you can show all these things by just letting the story unfold as it did as you actually experienced it. It's a really good question and a very, very tough balance, but those are the strategies. STAR, show, not tell, and vivid, specific. Those are the strategies to help ensure that you can come across as likable and human in your essays, even when showcasing something really important to you. I guess the last thing is that any of those, a big achievement should feel hard, even without you saying it's hard. We want to feel that there were some challenges in the way. No one likes an achievement that didn't really sound challenging. So make sure we see those challenges and that conflict in that story. All right, I hope that helps. So this question, another question, and I love these questions, so keep them coming. And I am not, I'm going to ask GMAT Club, thank you as always for hosting me. If you can let me know how long I should keep going, just so I can keep an eye on the time. But anyway, the question was, thanks for the insights. You're welcome. And how different are the approach for part-time programs? It is not, there are not really that many differences. The only difference, so these things that they're looking for, right? If you were developing a class, sorry, that's my cat is always with me. If you were developing a class, wouldn't you want the superstars? Wouldn't you want the people who are leaders that are going to push your thinking? So like, you would want this, you'd be looking for the same gems in your pack of applications as the full-time programs are. Same with the executive MBA programs. Nothing changes. It's all just really thinking you want to be showing you're better than anybody else. The only thing I would say about the part-time program, really about any of these programs, so this all comes down to that career purpose. You have to think about why do you want the MBA? Where does the MBA fall into reaching your goals? But you need to do that for the 2-year program, for the executive MBA, the part-time MBA. That there needs to be some thought around what you're going to leverage, besides the network, that's a word I would say do not use in your essays. I repeat, do not use the word network in your essays. You can learn from people and connect with people, but it's kind of like the schools know they hold on to that network. They know how valuable it is. And it's almost like saying you want to go to business school to earn money. It's just might be part of the equation, but it's certainly not what they want to hear. So really nothing changes if you are applying to part-time programs in sort of thinking about how to present yourself and what the schools are truly looking for. So I appreciate these questions. I would encourage you to keep going with any questions, and I am going to share a few more slides if you want. Let's see, and I don't even know what we have next. Oh, this one is sort of a word salad slide, but there might be some interesting things on here. Let's see, but here's a question first. I'll let you guys, I'll tee up the question, the slide first, and then I'll take this question. So I shared in the beginning that the reality, the sort of the punchline, if you will, the riddle of this is that these schools are looking for the same applicant, the same superstar. A superstar is a superstar is a superstar, right? But here's the rub, and here's what this slide, this word salad demonstrates. Though the schools are looking for the same person, the schools themselves are very different. Okay, I repeat, the schools are looking for the same brilliant person, but the schools themselves are very different. So this is just the tip of the iceberg in showcasing some of the things that the schools, how the schools differ. So it's everything from class size. Harvard Business School, over 900 people in its class, and Wharton just shy of that, while Stanford's almost half of that. So it's a very different experience. Some things aren't so different. The average GPA, the average test scores, they're all super, super high. And those, you need to really see those and understand, how high the bar is, I'd say. You have a lot of people coming in from private equity, a lot of people going out into private equity. You could almost see this for consulting. That's another big incoming. But the reason I actually share that is people think everybody's coming from either private equity or consulting, but it's not true. There's lots of other industries that are represented coming in or going out. And even one like private equity that is thought of as this really big pre-MBA pool and post-MBA pool, it really accounts for a fraction of the whole class. So if you're not in one of these spaces, that's okay. The school vibe and the highlights, all of these are different. You have the case method at HBS. While Stanford is much more experiential, I can't tell you how many of my clients refer to their experience at GSB as transformational. I think they really do. They just have a wonderful, wonderful time. And then Wharton, I think there is a misnomer out there that is finance and competitive, where all of our clients seem to be having a ball there. Like, it's so much fun. I had a client years ago. She made a really big pivot using her Wharton MBA. She was actually in the oil and gas industry. And coming out of business school, she went into investment banking. And I just remember her being like, I got to play on that. She lived in Texas, in the States. And she said, I got to, I'm a member of our hockey team. I've never played hockey in my life, and I'm not very good, but now I'm on the Wharton hockey team having a complete ball. So, and then if you look at the application components, they're all super different as well. The length of their essays, the question prompts themselves, which I have in another slide. But really what I want you to take from this is part of this, as I just said, is you will need to make the case that you not necessarily need, but you've thought long and hard about how and why the MBA will help you, and why the MBA from any given school will help you. And so your rationale for why HBS will help you and why you want to pursue your MBA there will differ from why a GSB MBA will help you, and what resources you want to pursue there. So though the business school is looking for the same version of you, the very best, you are expected and will need to show an understanding of the school specifics. All right, I'm going to let you guys look at this and see if you have any questions on the programs. And I already see a question and I love it. Follow-up questions on part-time programs. Are they undergrad focused or more what all you achieved in your work? It's a good question. So I will say these averages do not apply to the part-time programs. These are really for the top 3, obviously. So everything is going to be like these, these are considered the premier business schools. Some would argue that, but that's just one conventional way of thinking about it. I would say overall, the part-time programs are, it's just a different promise. And it's and so your undergrad grades are certainly important, and so are the test scores, and so is what you're doing in work. It all still is important, but I don't want you to see these numbers and think, oh my gosh, I can't get into a part-time program. I think the part-time programs really do want to see how will the MBA advance your career. But the other thing the MBA programs are always looking for is, are you going to add to the classroom experience? Are you going to add to the classroom learning? And if you have shown in your undergrad experience that you weren't somebody who committed, that you blew off your classes, that you weren't really interested in doing well, it doesn't send a positive sign to the schools, regardless of what program you're applying to. So just keep that in mind. That might mean you need to deliver a higher test score. That might mean you have to showcase even more excellence at work. Or if you can't do either of those things, which lots of people can't, you're kind of stuck with those things, right? Then you have to think about expanding your school list. Okay, those are the different levers that you can choose if you are sending, if something on your, again, that goes for anybody. When you have a weak spot, you have to think about, can I close it? Can I short up? Or do I have to expand my school list, or both? Okay, what does limited comprehensive online application mean? Great question. So the online application is literally the data form. When you are ready to submit your application, you have some data form online, fill out your name, your address. But some of the schools ask a lot of questions. Stanford and Harvard, those are the most comprehensive. So for example, Harvard will ask for your 3 most recent jobs, the most significant challenge, the key accomplishments for each, reasons why you left. Stanford asks, gives you opportunity to share 8 different activities. If you're busy and engaged, you'll have 8. If you're not, you'll be like, I don't have 8. And they also ask for 5 awards. Basically, you have room in Stanford's application for 15 different awards. Many people don't fill them all in. I wouldn't be able to, but you also want to think expansively about what awards you've gotten. So the thing, people often think about that data form as oh, I'll just do that quickly before hitting submit the night of. No, you want to spend significant time in filling it out, because it's another core part of the application. And you want to treat it, what I always say is each aspect of an application, they have to stand on their own. They have to be super strong on their own, and they have to work together. So when you're working on HBS or GSB, Harvard or Stanford, you can leverage the online application to tell the school even more about you. Wharton's online application is wicked brief. So you don't have much more room there. You just have to be cognizant. Okay, so do I have to use my resume slightly differently? Do I have to get more points in, or do I have to change my essay? So that's what that question is. Niche question. I like niche questions. No question is too niche. If I'm building a startup after hours of my full-time work, is that something I should mention, or will it come off as moonlighting? It's totally fine to mention it, with some caveats. One, how legit is it? If you're dabbling, and you've been dabbling for some time and it hasn't gotten any traction, I always kind of wonder, I sometimes see founders, president of an 8-month venture that started in 22 and ended in 23. Then I'm I just, it's a way to position it in a way that still feels like you're not overstating, you're not making a mountain out of a molehill. So that's one thing. Another thing is, you don't want to, so the schools really are up against this where entrepreneurs might come, leverage all the resources and leave after you drop out of the program. That's not what the schools are looking for. And complicating matters is if your startup is going really well, why on earth would you leave it to come to business school? So all these are kind of like it depends situation, but if you are running a startup and it is going well, make sure you address what's going to happen to the startup while you're in school. These programs, other programs aren't. These programs are full-time and you won't have time. Or if you do have time, you're probably not giving your all to the classroom. So make sure you've shown the schools what will happen with your startup while you're in a program. And then the other way to do is just like, maybe there's a brief mention on your resume if it's still small, and if it's part of your goals, you can mention it in your goal statement, how you have some ideas and you've started learning about it. We recently worked with somebody who started, he's really interested in the food and bev space. He's making a pretty bold career pivot to get into there. He's actually in sort of like finance related role, but he and a friend started just on the side, like they're dabbling with an ice cream brand, and they're launching it. It's very, very small. It is not on his resume. He didn't put it on the resume, but he did mention it in his goal statement as another piece of evidence that he's really ready to make this pivot. So there is definitely some nuance, but in general, look, the schools aren't going to really necessarily have a beef with you moonlighting. Business school itself, you will have to make time out of nothing. It's so busy. You're like, no, I thought it was going to be vacation when I'm at business school. It's not. Every single client who goes to business school ends up writing at least once the first year, like, oh my God, I had no idea how busy this is going to be. So they don't mind if you're moonlighting while working. So don't worry about that. Just worry about like the bigger, why am I sharing this? And is there a way to do it? Like, what is the best way to do it given the why I'm sharing it? And then follow up. If I'm working on an online MBA whilst applying to these schools, should I bring them up? My background is very non-traditional. So I took the online MBA to complement my profile. I think you could do that. I think I would still, like, what you do want to make sure is that your GPA or your GMAT or GRE is strong. But I think you could do that and just kind of position it almost as like a starter MBA to prepare you. I think that is, especially if your background's non-traditional, and maybe like if it's I think I would do that. As you can see, like sometimes all of these things are somewhat judgment calls, like, will you do this if, or maybe this, you want to do that. So the only thing I would want to make sure of is that you could still make the rationale of like, well, why do you need another MBA? So is this more learning foundational business so that you can hit the ground running in an MBA program? Or if you're really getting, it can't be just about getting the degree or the name on your resume. So you need to make a case of why you still need the MBA after that. Okay. Good. Any other questions? I'm going to jump to one more slide. I love all these questions, guys. So I had a few more slides looking at the essays, the interviews, and really the headlines here again are all of these are different. There's nothing cookie cutter. So we go back to that the why 50% didn't make the cut. It's because they didn't realize that the schools are looking for the same superstar, and they didn't realize how each school itself is different. That's it. The interviews too, all three are different. There's nothing that is purely cut and paste. I wish it would make the whole process so much easier, but these schools want the very best, and they want to see that you're willing to work through this process to earn that spot. And then I just am going to, I'll end with this, and please, any additional questions, please chime in with them. I'm not sure quite how much. I think we're just about over in just another minute or two, but GMAT Club, if you guys can let me know how many more minutes I have, that would be great. But in the meantime, what I will say is definitely visit Gatehouse Admissions if we can help you answer more of these questions. And that we have tons of free resources on our site, specifically around Harvard, Stanford, and Wharton. We have essay analysis. We have tips from alumni. We also have our interview prep guide for Harvard, Stanford, and Wharton. We just published last year, I think, maybe the year before, 50 examples of successful HBS essays. And then we published another book several years ago. I co-wrote these books with the founder of MBA Mission, What Matters and What More, that looked at the HBS of essays of a prior time, and then the current GSB essays as well. So I also encourage you, GMAT Club is great. They have so many resources on their YouTube channel and on Instagram, on GMAT Club itself. We're trying to catch up a little bit. So if you want some specific guidance from Gatehouse, definitely follow us on YouTube, TikTok. I think those are where we are most active. So definitely follow us up there as well. And I think any other questions before we wrap? Just checking to see on how much more time I have. But as always, I want to say thank you to GMAT Club for hosting these. These sessions are incredibly valuable, and I never had them when I applied to business school, and I encourage all of you to avail yourself over sessions like these. Sign up for future live YouTube lives, AMAs, subscribe to their channel, subscribe to Gatehouse's channel, and I wish all of you good luck. You had some great questions, but again, remember, an enormous number of people who are fully qualified to earn spots in these places don't make it. That is because they don't realize that they should be the same superstar for all of them, and they don't realize how different the programs are. So keep those two things in mind. Remember what they're really looking for and how to interpret those words, and I wish you good luck. All right, thanks everybody. Bye.